chromatic mediant is a chord that is either a third above or a third below the tonic chord, and also not in the key, i.e. it's chromatic. So for example, if we were in the key of G minor and we used the chord E flat minor, that would be a chromatic mediant because E flat minor doesn't belong in the key of G minor. However, E flat is a third away from G. The Imperial March from Star Wars is largely built on this move from G minor to E flat minor. Chromatic mediants have a weird, unnerving sound because the chord is chromatic, i.e. not in the same key, but despite this, the relationship between the two chords still works because both chords share a consistent note between them, a common tone. The G minor and E flat minor chords here both feature the note B flat. So this common tone can allow the chords to still work together, still fit together, despite not belonging together diatonically. For the two chords to be in the same key, the E flat here would have to be an E flat major chord, not an E flat minor. And in fact, later in Darth Vader's Imperial March theme, we do get a momentary switch to the E flat major chord instead. This brief moment of the regular diatonic E flat chord, rather than the chromatic mediant E flat minor, almost hints at the fact that there is still a bit of good and brightness left in Darth Vader, hidden away behind the dark exterior. Enjoy the Silence by Depeche Mode uses a chromatic mediant chord, giving the song an eerie mood. This time it's a different chromatic mediant relationship to that we saw in Star Wars. The verse of Enjoy the Silence uses the minor version of the 3 chord, the chord E flat minor in the key of C minor.
Words like violence break the silence, come crashing into my little world, painful to me, pierce right through me.
The C minor and E flat minor chords are a third away from each other. However, they are not found in the same key. To be in the same key, the E flat chord would have to be a major chord, not a minor chord. So why are these chords referred to as chromatic mediants? Where does that weird name come from? Well, the mediant, the regular mediant chord, is simply just the third chord of the key. So in the key of C major, for example, the mediant is E minor, the third chord of the key. Mediant ultimately means third. We also have a submediant chord, which is the chord that's not up a third from the root, but instead down a third, which effectively makes it the 6th chord of the key. In the key of C major, the submediant is A minor. These mediant and submediant chords are our regular diatonic mediant chords. So then if we have a chord that is related by a third to the root, but not in the key, not diatonic, well, now we have a chromatic mediant. Beyond being a third away from the root and also not in the same key, the third and final requirement for a chord to be considered a chromatic mediant is that both chords in the relationship are the same quality, i.e. they're both major or both minor. If the two chords are the same type and related by a third, it means they will always have a common tone between them. In the case of G minor and E flat minor, that common tone is B flat. This shared note allows the chromatic mediant relationship to work. If one of the chords was minor and the other major, we would no longer have that common tone between the two chords. Although bear in mind that some people use a looser definition of chromatic mediant chord, where they ignore this third requirement of both chords sharing the same chord quality. And yes, I know that's confusing. Music theory is far from agreed upon. The verse of Light My Fire by The Doors is based on this vamp between A minor 7 and F sharp minor 7.
You know that it would be untrue. You know that I would be a liar.
This F sharp minor 7 chord is a chromatic mediant. Here though, we have a supercharged chromatic mediant relationship because these chords aren't just triads, they're 7th chords. The inclusion of the 7th on the F sharp minor chord bonds these chords together more than a typical chromatic mediant because rather than having just the one common tone, the A, The two chords now also share the E, so they have two tones in common. This extra common tone sort of waters down the weirdness of the chromatic mediant sound. We still get an intriguing exotic sound, but it doesn't sound quite as jarring. The unusual striking sound of chromatic mediants makes them a common choice in film music. Howard Shore used them a lot on his Lord of the Rings soundtrack. The love theme for Aragorn and Arwen is based on a move between the tonic chord and the flat 6 chord, two different major chords that are a third apart but not in the same key as each other. This chord move gives the music an epic, awe-inspiring sound. We can see that same 1 to flat 6 chord progression in many pop and rock songs too. For example, here in It Won't Be Long by the Beatles.
Every night when everybody has fun, here am I sitting on my own.
In this pop song setting though, we don't quite get the same epic feeling from these chords, but we can still hear that same sense of a foreign, intriguing quality between these two chords that do and don't belong together. Radiohead's Morning Bow uses a chromatic mediant chord. The version of Morning Bow from Amnesiac uses this chord progression of A minor moving to C sharp minor, which is a chromatic mediant relationship. However, the reason I specify the Amnesiac version of Morning Bow is because the original version, released on Radiohead's Kid A album, makes one subtle change to the chord progression, which stops this chord from technically being a chromatic mediant. And that change is that on the Kid A version, both chords are underpinned by the note A, which transforms this C sharp minor chord into an A major 7 chord. Sometimes chord progressions that are described as chromatic mediants can also be described with a different music theory term, modal interchange or modal mixture. Modal interchange is when we use chords from the major and minor scale at the same time. So for example, in Head Over Heels by Tears for Fears, we have this progression moving from A major to C major, albeit with some extra chord extensions thrown in.
I wanted to be with you.
A and C are a third apart, and this C chord is chromatic to the key of A major, so we can certainly describe this C chord as a chromatic mediant in the key of A. However, we could alternatively analyse this progression through the lens of modal interchange, and describe this progression as a mix of chords from the key of A major and A minor. The thing is, both interpretations are perfectly valid. Music theory is not some standardised uniform thing, it's a collection of different lenses and different theories which often overlap. In fact, another music theory concept that overlaps with chromatic mediants is secondary dominance. Let's take Happier Than Ever by Billie Eilish as an example. Here we have this chord progression, moving from C major, the tonic chord, to the chord of E major. These chords are a third apart, and the E major chord is chromatic to the key. So we can certainly describe this chord as a chromatic mediant.
I'm happier than ever. Wish I could.
However, this E chord also functions here as a secondary dominant chord. It is the dominant chord of the 6th chord of the key, A minor. In other words, the E major chord here is the 5 of the 6, the 5th of the 6th chord of the key. And this is exactly what happens in the song. Our E major chord resolves onto A minor. It acts as a secondary dominant.
I'm happier than ever. Wish I could explain it better.
So once again, both chromatic mediant and secondary dominant are perfectly valid descriptions of what's going on in the music here. Although in this example, because we are getting a full textbook secondary dominant movement here from the E major chord to the A minor chord, I would be more inclined to describe this as a secondary dominant relationship rather than chromatic mediant. If the song instead just moved back and forth from C to E without ever resolving to A minor, then I think Chromatic Mediant would be a better description of this E major chord. Ultimately, the wider context of the music will often make one description, one perspective, more relevant and useful. If you'd like to learn more about secondary dominant chords, check out this video that I made last year. I'll leave you today with this piece that I've written exclusively using chromatic mediant chords.